Hey, today's topic is going to be about Astralis and their recent faltering form, if you want to call it that. So, Astralis for the last, I'd go back to maybe the end of last year, where so that's about 10, 11 months now, have been one of the best teams, at times the best team, or certainly in the discussion of at least the top three best teams for a long period of time. And the reason for that was obviously because of the change from Kerrigan to Glaive, where they had complete confidence, and Glaive's style of calling was, and his structured style was much more in line with what some of the players on that team were more comfortable with. So it worked out. At the same time, they found a way to activate Kirby by putting him into the second in role, where he and Glaive teamed up to get that map control and then exploded onto sites. It was extremely effective, and after they made that change, first event top four IEM Oakland, second event I think it was second at E League, third event they win ECS, then they win the major, and then and at this point, you're thinking, oh my god, maybe there is a potential like Astralis era about to happen. And then they go to Vegas, they get beaten by Virtus Pro, and then but it was like a top four. It was like and it was Virtus Pro before they went to hell, so it was acceptable. It was actually because of Virtus Pro at the time were right up there fighting for that top spot. And then they go to IEM Katowice, and then they beat the newly formed FaZe team. And at this point, we were thinking to ourselves, okay, if they win one more, I think it's very obviously in Astralis era. And then they go to Starladder Kiev, and then FaZe beat them in the finals in an incredibly close finals that like went to overtime on the third map, but FaZe win it. And that at that point, it's like, oh, too bad Astralis didn't get to like build an era, so to speak, but they were very much the in the like argument for best team in the world, most consistent team, and ever since then they've always lacked something. And what I mean by lack something is we go into this era where there's basically three teams. There's Astralis, actually four teams, I guess. There's Astralis, G2, SK, FaZe, and SK is by far the best team in the world. I don't think that's a strange thing to say because they won so many events back to back to back. At the same time, they were beating every other best team except for G2, head to head at least. So it felt like they were likely to create a new era. And then FaZe was below them. FaZe was getting into all the multiple finals. I think they got 4 finals in a row, but the only one they ever won was against Astralis. They lost every other one. And then you had G2, who had potential, but there was a few there were a few like problems in their team makeup, not lineup wise, but in how they played the economy, who they were trying to prioritize in terms of playmaking, stuff like this. And finally, we have Astralis, who basically stayed the same. But if you look through each of these tournaments as they go forward, IEM Sydney, they play FaZe again, and then they lose. And yeah, granted, the first map was Cobble, which was a meh map for both teams, and then it was like a mind game from Kerrigan that won that. But even with that caveat, it felt like this Astralis was not the same Astralis that lost to FaZe at Starladder Kiev, right? Like it didn't feel like they were at that level of strength. You go to ECS, they lose to SK. It's like, well, SK was the best team at the time. That's fair enough. And then they go to PGL Major, and then they have everybody else, and they go on this crazy they have this super crazy series against SK, where they really like just beat up SK, and it was at that point like I assumed, I think a lot of people assumed Astralis looked to be the favorite team to win the entire tournament, but then they got upset by Gambit, famously Zeus with the fucking crazy call near the end of the series was what won them that series, and then eventually Gambit won the major. So if you think about it like that, right, it doesn't feel like it's that bad for Astralis until you bring up the fact that they haven't won a tournament since I Am Katowice. I Am Katowice was months ago, and yeah, it's impressive that obviously it's impressive that Astralis have consistently gotten to the top 4 so many times in so many different tournaments. But at some point in your if you want to be the best team, you want to convert like a few of those into tournament victories, into tournament championships, because I feel like that's always been the goal for this team. That's always been the goal for every team near the top of CS:GO, is to win titles. And so what exactly is it that was holding them back throughout this period? Well, first off, I feel like they didn't have enough edges against well, actually, let me put it this way. They didn't attend that many tournaments. And what I mean by that is during their peak, they have this idea that, fair enough, I think there are both positives and negatives. But basically the idea was that we don't go to every tournament. We are very selective about the ones we choose, and then we show up in peak form for those tournaments. That's basically what Astralis has been doing for all of 2017, and they're one of the few teams to do that, like by choice, not because they failed the online qualifier or something. But because you do that, you don't really like hammer in your peak form, if so to speak. Like ESL Clone's a bit weird just because it was a week before the major, and it's clear that Astralis learned something in that week because they smashed SK, but they didn't learn enough because guess what, Gambit didn't go to that tournament as far as I remember. So like when they go to Gambit, they don't really have that information about Gambit, and Gambit themselves were like going fucking crazy in scrims. Crazy in a bad way, as in they were losing all of them, so there was no information there either. So basically, this Astralis team, because they didn't go to that many tournaments, it was always going to be harder for them to win a championship, just because you're having less chances at it, right? But at the same time, it feels more sustainable. You're less likely to burn out. You have better prep time, so it's like a trade-off. Whereas somebody like SK went to every tournament and they won almost all of them except for the major. So that's that's another way to look at it. And then for FaZe, I'm not actually sure what FaZe's deal was when it came to their practice, because yeah, Astralis were selective. SK went to every single tournament, but that's also because SK felt like they really wanted to grind into their peak form going into the major. And honestly, I actually think they could have been like the second best team there. Maybe they could have even won if that was like a double elimination tournament. I'm not sure. But they were actually, I actually thought they were pretty good at the major themselves but Astralis were just on another form that day. As for FaZe, there were like some weird rumors I heard that basically they had problems being serious in practice. So that's why they kept going to tournaments, because their tournaments and their like live games were the only times they could get the entire team to focus or something. I'm not exactly sure, but that was kind of weird. As for G2, G2 did practice a lot, but like they failed a few online qualifiers, so that's what stopped them from like ascending. At the same time, like I said, they already had a few problems. And at this point, after the PGL major, you're like, fair enough. Like Astralis should still be one of the best teams in the world. They don't feel like they were a team that could be the number one. The reason being, you look at the other teams in the world, I feel like man for man, skill wise, the potential for other teams was higher. So SK had two of the best players I consider in the same team, Cold and Fur. And then G2 had Kenny S. FaZe had, just pick one of the four guys. Like, what is this? Gambit didn't have Zeus anymore, so that was no longer a problem. But if you just look at Gambit's pure firepower across the board, Adren, Hobbit, Fitch, even Mo, I guess, but I don't actually think Mo's that good. Even he's had a few good events, but I'm not buying into him yet. But even with Adren moving to the in-game leader role, he still has some impact as the supportive player in that team. So just in terms of like overall fragging, I feel like even like something like Gambit is comparable to Astralis right now. And here's the thing: as you watch more and more, as I've watched more and more CS, it feels like you need both. What I mean by that is there's like three things you could think about. There are three factors you can think about for creating a championship level team. You need teamwork, you need tactics, and you need skill. And you either need to be exceptional at one of them to the point where like nobody's close to you, or you need like a combination of two or the three of them, right? And if you look at Astralis, skill wise they'd be fine, except it just happens in this era there's a bunch of much more skilled teams. Tactics wise they're really good, but are they above everybody else to an exceptional point? I don't think so. I feel like Kerrigan's like style calling is kind of doesn't exactly counter them, but it's good against Astralis. Fallen's a very good tactician. Zeus was pretty good on fucking Gambit, right? And then yeah, Shox. I don't think Shox is as good as G2, but with G2's case, they have Kenny S, who is arguably the best player right now, easily the best opper, certainly better than almost every player on Astralis, I think. Though I did right, and I still do think that Device could probably find a counter solution to Kenny S just in that very specific matchup, but that's a different topic. So there's that. And then you go into the next two events after the break. There's DreamHack Malmo, whatever, where they lose in the playoffs against Gambit without Zeus. And like I said, the Gambit's just in terms of pure firepower, as we find out now, at this point, is pretty equal with Astralis. So in that point, it comes down to your tactics, your preparation, your teamwork, your skill, right? And actually, if you think about it, Gambit just in terms of like pure form, I feel like they had more players better on that day than Astralis did. Like, I feel like Karabi's been falling down. Device wasn't as great as he was. Glaive has been in trouble for a long time now. Zipnix is still good, but he's also a supportive, like, defensive carry, if you want. Like, basically, the entire point of Zipnix is like he's supposed to be cleaning up. He's supposed to be cleaning up rounds and like getting you like game-breaking rounds every once in a while with his clutches, but because they're clutches, like even if he played them perfectly, that doesn't mean he wins them. That just means you have you get this like bonus advantage compared to other teams who don't have this amazing support player who can win clutches for you, right? So I feel like Dupree's been pretty good. So whereas on the other side though, I feel like three of the players on Gamma has continued to be good: Adren, Hobbit, Fitch. Like, Adren's not nearly as good as he was when he was like an MVP level player, but like he still has impact. He's still good in that sense. On top of that, Mo is he's raised his I won't say he raised his consistency. He raised his ceiling. What I mean by that is I don't feel like his consistency level is much higher. It just feels like he's much more likely to go off against better teams than he was before. Because before Krakow Major, like, he didn't play well against tier 1 teams at all. After that, I feel like it's not like he's becoming more consistent. It's that he's actually playing at a higher level sometimes, and that was enough. And I don't actually think Doja is very good. I actually think Doja is probably the worst player out of the 10 in that series. And then finally, Gambit had this super weird like Mirage, like CT side style that Astralis had no idea how to beat, and nobody in the server, I guess, could figure out the fact that they really needed to just cheat on their utility, and then use their utility in their actual executes, and then because Gambit were using the super totally style, it worked out, so fair play to them. So you're thinking, okay, well, yeah, it was a round of 8. And yeah, they didn't get to round of 4, but how many times is that really going to happen? Is Gambit really going to like be able to pull that off again once Astralis read the tapes? I don't think so. I feel like Astralis is too good of a preparation team for that. But here's the killer, and the killer is what happens at Malmo and what happens at ESL New York. Because you continue on the Malmo trend, two teams rise up at Malmo, and that's North and G2. North finally beat SK. They're like faded like demon, so to speak, because SK is beating the shit out of them for so long. Since all the way back when they were Dignitas, and with Rubino, and then like both iterations with the Magus and then Rubino before that, and then G2. I feel like G2 have finally ascended from like that fourth place dark horse team to straight up championship contender because they fixed their economy. It feels like they've decided to give Shox more impact roles on, or maybe it's just Shox deciding he should like put himself more forward as like a secondary star instead of relying on the other three players, Apex, Body, MBK, all great players, but none of them have the pure impact power that Shox does. So there's that, and then by fixing the economy, they've found a way to like not screw over their like huge leads, and they've increased like Kenny S's potential just because you're going to get more ops that way. So it feels like they are really on the rise. It feels like they could be the number one team in this era right now. North themselves have risen up. Like I said, it feels like like if you look at the old North, I made a video about this, but the essential problem with AZ, when you put him into like the two roles, either lurker or second in, because those were the two roles he would search around with config every once in a while. Mostly though he was second in, was that he was not nearly as strong as config was, and he wasn't. And as a lurker, I felt he was fairly ineffective. Either he died, or he was too aggressive, and then like everybody knew where the rest of the team was. And there were a bunch of other marginal problems in North, but that was like certainly one of them. And Valde coming in has taken. I think at this point North have decided that Valde will be the lurker. Config will go back to his old role of second in, and then AZ will be more on the supportive end. And this is actually fine with me for now. And what I mean by that is I've been one of the guys who's been like, yeah, I probably need to kick out AZ pretty soon. But at this point, there's not. But at this point, he's no longer getting like the crazy amount of resources. Like when I mean resources is like there are certain like positions where you have to frag from. Like if you're given star level resources, you have to give star level fragging. You have to give star level impact. AZ was not giving that in the previous roster. In this roster, he doesn't have to, because that's not his job anymore. It's Valde's job. It's Config's job, and so I don't like. I'd probably still kick him, but it's not like as urgent as it was. Like just let this lineup play out. See how it goes. Like yeah, G2 beat you, but North can still improve. So we'll see. North can still improve because they've just made this lineup. So we'll see how. I think they can stick with it for now, and see how far they can push it. So basically, how does this relate to Astralis? Basically, the point is, Astralis before this had a few big factors after the Krakow Major as to why they could have been the best. They could still be a top team. First was because G2 it didn't seem like they were going to fix their problems, but they have. North were always underwhelming, no longer underwhelming. So all of a sudden, and there's still SK up there. So there's three teams, and then Astralis. So you're still one of the top four teams, right? Or so we thought. Go to ESL New York, two teams rise up. Team Liquid basically proved themselves as an elite side, beating SK in a best of three, beating Astralis in a best of three. They also went to Mykonos, where they also beat SK in another best of three before that. So at this point, you have to conclude Liquid is a championship contender, at least in the sense that they can beat the elite teams in the world. They have yet to face North or G2. And then even though they got stomped by FaZe in the finals, you have to give a caveat to the Liquid guys in the sense that not a lot of them have experience on that level of stage. Like I feel like the only one I've ever seen like prove to me that he can fight on that level was Alish. Alish did show up, but the rest of the guys they weren't there, and it's not even like it wasn't even just individual performances. It was like a team systemic failure. So that's just something they're going to fix over time with experience, and then that's how they will grind their way, and then we'll see how the rematch goes. As for FaZe, I guess not everybody, but I thought FaZe as an all-star lineup was going to have to take much more time than it did to rebuild. It actually didn't take that much time at all. Apparently, Kerrigan is the god builder of cars or whatever. So this team is fucking amazing already. They've just fucking destroyed ESL New York. I will say they didn't go through like a hell bracket like Team Liquid did, but god damn, they beat the shit out of everybody they faced. And at this point, you're Astralis. You're thinking, okay, Liquid, SK, FaZe, G2 North. There are 5 teams out there there are like 5 championship contending teams out there right now. At the same time, you're also losing to a team like Gambit, which is good. I still don't think they're championship contenders yet. So at this point, it feels like Astralis are slowly falling off. Having said all of that, what are the exact problems with Astralis? Basically, Device says it straight up. The individual forms of the players just aren't as good as they were, and their tactics I think are still fine. I think their preparation is still fine. There's only 2 caveats or 2 things you should look out for is their individual form. Like I said, is not nearly as good as it once was, and at the same time, that super weird decision to not go to Overpass. Like, I get they lost to Gambit on Overpass at the major, but that was like Mo going crazy. That's not really... Oh my fucking god, wait. Okay, so this happened, I forget the year, but basically at some point in a major, when Astralis played NIP and IP, they used to go to Train, and Astralis were one of the best teams on Train, and then Freiburg ruined them. Like, Freiburg fucking destroyed them, and then they never went to play Train again. I'm not sure this is the case with Mo and Overpass, but I really hope it's not, because if they gave up their home map just for something as stupid as that, that's ridiculous. I hope they didn't do that, but at the same time, why didn't they choose Overpass against Liquid is a mystery to me. Maybe they played in scrims and found out Liquid was really good on it. Even though Liquid themselves, I feel like I've seen some good things. Like you can see it on the FaZe map in the FaZe series, but I haven't been particularly convinced that Liquid could actually beat Astralis on that. Like, yeah, there's the caveat about like them Liquid beating them before, but that was a different formation of Liquid, and it was like super high temperature or something weird. I feel like if you run that scenario a bunch of times, Astralis should be coming out on top more often than not. So yeah, the other point about the individual skill is that during the off season, I feel like Astralis, if they wanted to change, they could have. And then the obvious change and the only change I think they might have considered is Config for Kirby, just because they both play a similar role, except Config is like super fucking good right now. But I understand why they didn't, just because Kirby is so young. I think he's like 19, so is Config. But when they hired Kirby, it felt like they were trying to hire like a franchise player, like on the same level of like what Liquid is probably going to do with Twist or Liege, or Nitro, where you're like try to keep them for as long as possible because you're going to build your entire team around them. Like, I feel like that's kind of going to be Kirby's role. And even though Kirby is failing now, I still think the potential is there. So the question is, how long are they willing to ride it out through the slump? Because you look at the rest of the rules, it doesn't feel like there's an obvious change. Glaive, one of the best in-game leaders. Yeah, he might not be doing that well in entry fragger as he was before, but he's still a great in-game leader. Zipnix, you're not going to get a better support player in the world, probably. Probably in the world. There's like there are comparable guys, but none of them know Danish. Like Dupree, I feel like Dupree's like form has been pretty good overall. Like, I don't feel like you have a justification to kick him, and even if you did have a justification to kick him, I don't know if there's even like a player out there right now that they want to go for. I mean, but I guess I don't know enough about the data machine, and the data machine does like churn them out like a fucking factory. So maybe, but like I said, that's only if Dupree was doing bad. But I feel like Dupree's been doing like second best on this team, or arguably even the best. And then Device is obviously the superstar player. You're not going to kick him, so it feels like they're kind of stuck for now. And that's they're gonna have to fix it internally. They're gonna have to do it like the VP way. They're gonna have to write it out, try to maybe change rules or fix up their map veto, because I feel like, given the circumstances where they skipped the off season, I'm not sure if they could have gotten config, but if they could have, I probably would have gone for it. But because they missed that chance, they have to do it the hard way now. And it's going to be extraordinarily hard, just because there are so many good teams that have randomly risen up during the break. But I will say, this also happened the last break. I forget the timing of it, but basically, like, there's a bunch of, or I forget which break it was, but there were a bunch of weird results right after the break. So, it's not like all alarms are set off and we need to freak out yet for Astralis, but there are certainly signs that the star of Astralis is falling. All right, that's about it. See you later.